This is Before Your Eyes, an emotionally driven story where you play through the life of Benjamin Brynn from early childhood until death, with the key mechanic here being that if you blink, you'll move on to the next memory. This released March 9th, 2023 for the PlayStation VR 2 headset for roughly $15 US. Can this narrative-heavy tale with minimal gameplay deliver an engrossing story, or is this yet another forgettable VR experience? Let's find out. Hello virtual boys and girls, this is Ryan for the VR Grid, and before we get to it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment letting us know how you feel about this release. Also, join us live on this channel Thursdays at 9 PM Eastern Time for the Virtual Boys podcast, where we chat all things VR. And now, the review. I won't spoil anything important to the plot, as how the story unfolds is the reason to pick this up, so here's what I'll give you. You experience the life of Benjamin through his memories, with the game opening after his death on a ferry ride to the afterlife. It's here where you must revisit pivotal moments in your life so the dog-like ferryman can plead your case to those who will allow you to pass on. What's interesting is that to progress the story, you'll have to use PSVR 2's eye tracking, which specifically tracks when you blink, because when you do, you'll flash forward to the next memory, potentially skipping key moments that may be important later on. Now don't fret, as you do have the option of turning that off, with the final act of the game letting you revisit some of these moments for a second go, so while it's true that if you blink you'll miss it, it's not the end of the world. The story here won't take more than 90 minutes to get through, and plays in relatively linear fashion, feeling much more like an extended experience than a game, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. During each scene a metronome icon will appear, and when it does, regardless of if the memory is still playing out, your next blink will move you forward to the next recollection, which could be the next day, month, or even years from your last one. Some scenes do have additional interactions, which allow you to draw patterns in the night sky, move clouds, or just use items nearby as indicated by an eye icon. By looking at said icon and blinking, instead of moving on to the next memory, you'll interact with what you are looking at, with some of these being choices you can make to change up the memory a little bit. It's unfortunate that outside of blinking, eye tracking isn't used for any other interactions in the game, so with a little white dot reticle in the center of your screen, you'll have to use standard head tracking to look at the stuff you want to manipulate. The only other technical issue I'll mention is that in some scenes, the game tries to force you to look forwards by turning your screen black and giving you misleading screen text that says return to play area if you turn your head away from the action, which I found to be very immersion breaking, as all I wanted to do was check out what was around me. Neither of these issues are game breaking, but in a game with such minimal interaction, I think a little more use of eye tracking and letting me view the scenes I was placed in would have helped further immerse me in these memories. With that said, I really did enjoy the blinking mechanic and cursed myself every time I accidentally entered a scene, and though that can be a little frustrating at times, it's a great excuse to revisit the game again and see what you may have missed. For those trying to cheat the system, winking one eye counts as a blink, so don't even bother. I tried it, it didn't work. There are also a few unique interactions, like when you're playing a piano, that can be a little challenging as you try and follow the key prompts as it moves back and forth across the piano. Though these moments are few and far between, adding a little bit of game to the story and a little depth to what is otherwise a very narrative-heavy experience. As much as I enjoy the story being told and how it plays out, my largest gripe with the game has to be the art style, which I have found to be, well, not very immersive. I understand that this was made by a relatively small team, and that it was originally made as a flat game, but the very simple art style used, in my opinion, reduced the emotional impact of the story. The basic cartoon facial expressions and limited body motions had me longing for a little more detail, at least in the human models. The style chosen looks much more akin to something you'd see in a low-budget toddler's TV show, which would be fine for some games I suppose, but in here, I just found it to be contradictory to the emotionally heavy story being told. Outside of the character models, that simplicity matters much less, with almost all of the game taking place in front of you in dreamlike fashion, with the focus of that memory being surrounded by a shifting black background, as if you were looking at it through a lens. Sometimes you can expand these memories and scenes by looking at areas out of sight, whereupon that blackness recedes, but for the most part, you'll be jumping from one memory to the next, taking as much as you can without blinking. I don't want to say the game looks bad, just so stripped back that at times, it took away from some of the more impactful scenes. It's really hard to talk about all the performances here without ruining the plot, so all I'll say is that all the actors do an amazing job at their respective roles, even if it doesn't seem like they are at the time. Your parents and neighbor are whom you'll talk with the most, though you don't have a voice, so most of the game has you passively listening to them talk, with those occasional interactions allowing you to steer a few memories in different directions. Spatial audio is present, but with almost all of the story happening in front of you, it's underutilized, and even if the characters were to your right or left, it was often hard to tell where they were, and it wasn't until I removed one of my earbuds to see if there was 3D audio that I actually noticed it. The soundtrack here is designed to cinematically fall in the background, rarely if ever overpowering the situation, which I did appreciate, as the music did accentuate the scenes it was being played in without ever taking away from the acting, which is great, as, once again, the performances are the saving grace here.
That's look at
Now, as you can see, she is ready to devour any of the deceased who do not pass judgment. Sort of like me with your weekly quizzes. So I am not quite sure why I don't hear more frantic scribbling right now.
Why is he so scared looking? Okay, I'll call you when I'm leaving my house. You better pick up my call, dude.
I like Before Your Eyes, and it really needs to be played through in its entirety before being judged, as the few issues I had with the storytelling were justified by how it all ends. This is more experience than game, but if you are looking for what ultimately ends up being an interactive film, then I think you'll enjoy this, as long as you're not adverse to some tragedy. While I do think the eye tracking could be better utilized in VR, it's still a fun mechanic that adds a unique layer of depth to this emotional tale, but this might be a title to purchase on sale, as its shortcomings do hamper the immersion, and thus the story. At least it did for myself. The VR Grid gives Before Your Eyes a 6.5 out of 10. I enjoyed it for what it is, but this just won't be for everyone. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to do all the things to help us out. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching.